At 9:30 in the morning, a child walks out of the house with a bicycle and disappears. No phone, no GPS, no location sharing, no parent watching a blue dot move across a screen. For the next 6 hours, nobody knows exactly where that child is. They might be riding 3 neighborhoods away, climbing something they were told not to climb, knocking on a friend's door, fixing a chain with dirty hands, or sitting somewhere doing absolutely nothing. And somehow, this is considered normal. Then, just before dark, the front door opens. The child walks back in, maybe with a scraped knee, maybe hungry, maybe carrying a story no adult will ever fully hear. The parent looks up and asks one question: "You're home?" That's it. For people raised in the 1970s, childhood often contained a level of freedom that would feel almost impossible today. But that freedom did something psychologically complicated. It taught millions of children to navigate the world without constant supervision. It built confidence, improvisation, practical judgment, and a powerful internal sentence: "I'll figure it out." But there is another side to that sentence. Sometimes, "I'll figure it out" is confidence. Sometimes it is what a child learns when asking for help never becomes the first option. And that is where the psychology of people raised in the 1970s becomes much more interesting than nostalgia. Because the same childhood that produced independence could also produce emotional self-containment. The same freedom that created resilience could teach a person to minimize danger. The same adults who modeled strength could accidentally teach silence. And the generation that learned how to survive without constant guidance may still struggle with one question decades later: what happens when the problem cannot be solved alone? A child in that period encountered long stretches of life with no immediate adult response. If something went wrong, there was often a delay between the problem and the rescue. You fell off the bike, you dealt with the bleeding, you got lost, you found your way back. A friend got hurt, someone ran for an adult, something broke, you tried to make it work. The important lesson was not that the world was safe. The lesson was that uncertainty was survivable. That distinction matters. This is the central metaphor. They grew up without a permanent control tower. That is what repeated, unsupervised experience can do psychologically. The child begins building an internal control tower. This helps explain the strange confidence many people from that era carry. Not confidence that everything will go well, something more practical. Confidence that if it does not go well, they will probably find something to do next. There is an enormous psychological difference between those beliefs. One says, "Nothing bad will happen." The other says, "Something bad might happen, and I can still function." That second belief often creates resilience. But where did the emotional tone come from? Because many people raised in the 1970s were also raised by adults shaped by very different historical pressures. The emotional message was rarely, "Let's process everything you're feeling." It was often closer to, "We have a problem, what needs to be done?" This is why many people from that generation describe growing up early. That model can follow people for decades. But this practical competence came with a hidden cost. When "figure it out" becomes central to identity, needing help can begin to feel like evidence that something has gone wrong inside the self. This is the first major reversal. Independence is not always the same as freedom. Sometimes independence is a strategy that became so successful that the person forgot it was ever a strategy. But now, change the problem. The old strategy activates automatically. Handle it. Do not make it dramatic. Keep moving. Find a solution. Except some experiences do not respond to competence, and the person who has spent 40 years solving problems may feel surprisingly helpless when the problem is internal. This is one reason emotional understatement can become so recognizable in people from that era. Humor serves a similar function. The joke creates distance. Distance creates control. If you can laugh at something, it becomes easier to hold. This can make the person seem emotionally resilient. It can also make intimacy difficult. Because the same humor that protects the self can stop another person from knowing when something actually hurts. The shield works in both directions. Then there is trust. This creates a complicated relationship with authority. This is not pure rebellion. It is evidence-based trust. And it mirrors the way many of them learned life itself. Show me that it works. Do not just tell me. That attitude also shaped friendship and loyalty. Many people from that era do not need constant contact to believe a relationship is real. A friend can disappear into work, family, or life for weeks and still be considered close. The bond is measured less by frequency and more by whether the person shows up when it matters. In a culture now built around constant messaging, that can look emotionally distant. But for them, reliability often carries more weight than visibility. You do not have to announce the friendship every day. You prove it when the car breaks down at midnight, when someone is sick, or when life becomes inconvenient. Privacy fits into this same architecture. People raised before digital life experience something younger generations barely remember: the possibility that an embarrassing moment could simply disappear. That changes the meaning of privacy. For someone who grew up before continuous documentation, broadcasting ordinary life can feel unnatural. This is not necessarily fear of technology, and that makes them a genuine bridge generation. One foot stands in an analog world, the other stands in a digital one. That bridge position creates a strange form of psychological bilingualism. They remember waiting, scarcity of information, and private life, but they also learn to function inside instant access, endless communication, and permanent documentation. They know both rhythms. That can make them skeptical when convenience is confused with necessity. If a phone dies, the world does not feel impossible. If an answer takes time, they can usually tolerate the gap. They remember that life continued before every uncertainty could be resolved in seconds. People raised in the 1970s spent more time inside unanswered questions, and sometimes an unanswered question had to remain unanswered for hours. That can build tolerance for uncertainty. But nostalgia can become dishonest here. The same childhood conditions that built resourcefulness could also hide neglect. The same lack of supervision that created confidence sometimes exposed children to danger. The same get-on-with-it attitude that produced endurance could discourage asking for help. The same emotional restraint that kept families functioning could leave people unable to name what they were carrying. Strength is not evidence that the environment was ideal. Sometimes strength is evidence that adaptation worked. And successful adaptations are dangerous because no one thinks to question them. This is the midpoint reversal. People from the 1970s are often admired because they learned to function without much support. But the deepest psychological question is not whether they became capable. They clearly did. It is whether capability became the only version of themselves they know how to respect. Because there is a difference between "I can handle this" and "I must handle this alone." The first is confidence. The second can become a prison. You can see that difference in relationships. The person may be overwhelmed, but receiving help feels more uncomfortable than giving it. This is why the famous sentence, "I'll figure it out," deserves a second hearing. It sounds strong, and often it is. But sometimes the sentence also contains an old child standing somewhere without a control tower. No phone, no immediate rescue, no reason to expect somebody to arrive quickly. So they became good at returning home. And perhaps that is the real psychology of people raised in the 1970s. None of that makes them better than the generations after them. The mistake is turning adaptation into moral superiority. The 1970s did not manufacture stronger human beings. They manufactured human beings optimized for a particular kind of uncertainty, and optimization always creates blind spots. The person trained for uncertainty may become excellent in a crisis and strangely uncomfortable in calm. They know what to do when something breaks, but not always what to do when nothing needs fixing. Activity feels familiar. Vulnerability does not. Solving creates identity. Receiving can feel passive. So the strength everyone admires may coexist with a quiet difficulty. They are often better at surviving hard moments than inhabiting soft ones. And today, many of those people are living in a world built around the opposite assumptions. Maybe that is why some of them feel oddly grounded inside modern chaos. Now return to the child from the beginning. It is almost dark. The bicycle hits the driveway. The front door opens. Nobody tracked the route. Nobody watched the journey. The parent does not know every mistake that happened during those 6 hours. They only know the child came back. Decades later, that child may still enter difficult situations with the same internal assumption: "I can find my way home." That belief is one of the great strengths of that generation. But perhaps adulthood adds one final lesson childhood never taught. Finding your own way home is a powerful skill. Knowing when you do not have to travel alone may be an even harder one.